Apple is one of the most innovative companies on earth. They invented the smartphone. They invented the tablet. They just forgot to invent most of the features that go on them. Here is every feature Apple copied from Android, and exactly how long it took. Notification bar. Apple said they invented it. Android launched a pull-down notification bar in 2008. Every alert, every app, one swipe down. Right there. It was the first thing Android users showed iPhone users at the time. Apple added the exact same thing in iOS 5 in 2011. 3 years later. Same concept, same swipe, same functionality. Apple called it a revolutionary new way to handle notifications. Then Apple's legal team argued in court that Apple invented the notification system. This was in 2012, in the Apple versus Samsung trial. The judge reviewed Android's 2008 notification shade as evidence. Apple's argument did not hold up. Neither did it hold up with anyone who had owned an Android phone since 2008. 3 years is actually Apple moving fast. The next one took 4. Larger screens. 4 years of calling big phones stupid. The Samsung Galaxy Note had a 5.3-inch screen in 2011. Millions of people bought it immediately. Steve Jobs publicly called large phones ridiculous. He said no one would buy a phone you cannot use with one hand. Apple released 3.5-inch iPhones for 3 more years after that statement. Then in September 2014, Apple launched the iPhone 6, 4.7 inches on the standard model, 5.5 inches on the Plus. Apple described these as the best iPhones they had ever made. The same screen size as Android had been selling since 2011. Apple said they had been working on this for a long time. Android said they had been waiting for the apology for the same amount of time. 4 years of telling customers they were wrong. Then 4 years of pretending the conversation never happened. At least that was just a size. The next one was a whole feature. Third-party keyboards. Android had it from day one. Android allowed third-party keyboards from version 1.0 in 2008. Swift key, swipe, Gboard. Install whichever keyboard you preferred. Different layouts, different languages, different autocorrect behavior. Your choice. The iPhone only had Apple's keyboard. That was it. No alternatives allowed, no exceptions. Apple's keyboard, or go home. iOS 8 in 2014 finally opened up third-party keyboards, 7 years after the original iPhone launched. Apple announced it as a major feature at their annual developers conference. The room filled with applause. Android developers in the audience were genuinely confused by the reaction. It was just how a phone had always worked. 7 years for a keyboard. The settings panel took 5. Quick settings and control center. The direct copy. Android had quick settings built into its notification panel from 2011. A dedicated quick settings panel on phones arrived with Android 4.2 in late 2012. One swipe down from the top. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, brightness, airplane mode. iOS 7 in 2013 introduced Control Center. You swipe down from the top right corner instead. The layout, the toggles, and the entire concept are the same. Apple called it a brand new way to interact with your iPhone. Android called it their panel from 2012. For years before this, changing your iPhone's brightness meant opening the full settings app. Then Control Center fixed that. About 1 year after Android on phones, which makes this one of Apple's faster copies on this list. The wireless charging wait was much longer. Wireless charging. 6 years and a canceled product. The Nokia Lumia 920 shipped with wireless charging in 2012. The Samsung Galaxy S6 had it in 2015. By 2016, wireless charging was standard on most Android flagships. Apple added wireless charging to the iPhone 8 in 2017, 5 to 6 years after Android had normalized it. Apple announced alongside it a wireless charging mat called AirPower. AirPower could charge your iPhone, your AirPods, and your Apple Watch simultaneously. Apple canceled AirPower in 2019 because the engineering was too difficult. The feature Android phones had built into budget devices was apparently complicated. Wireless charging still came to iPhone. AirPower just quietly disappeared and was never mentioned again. 6 years late and one product short. Dark mode was only 1 year behind that. Dark mode. Years of publicly begging. Many Android manufacturers offered a dark mode from around 2015. Android 9 Pie added an official system-wide dark mode in 2018. iPhone users had been publicly asking Apple for dark mode for years. Reddit threads, Twitter posts, Apple feedback forms. Every year, Apple did not respond. No acknowledgement, just silence. iOS 13 in 2019 finally added system-wide dark mode. Apple presented it as a highlight of their annual software announcement. iPhone users celebrated like they had personally invented it. Android users had been using it for years without thinking about it twice. One toggle, easier on the eyes at night, saves battery on OLED screens. Somehow it took until 2019, but at least dark mode was just software. The next feature required hardware, and Samsung had it 6 years before Apple. Always on display, 6 years after Samsung. The Samsung Galaxy S7 launched with an always-on display in 2016. Clock, date, and notifications visible without waking the screen. Pick up your phone, glance at it, put it down. Done. Apple launched always-on display with the iPhone 14 Pro in 2022. 6 years after the Galaxy S7. Apple described the hardware engineering as a remarkable achievement. Samsung described it as something they had shipped in 2016. Apple also limited it to the Pro models only. The standard iPhone 14 did not get always-on display at all. 6 years late, and only on the expensive version. For the cheaper iPhone, you still had to tap the screen to see the time. 6 years of tapping when Samsung users just looked. The next gap is shorter, only about 1 to 2 years. High refresh rate, 120 Hz, the shortest wait on the list. The OnePlus 7 Pro had a 90 Hz display in May 2019. The Samsung Galaxy S20 had a 120 Hz display in February 2020. Apple added 120 Hz to the iPhone 13 Pro in September 2021. Roughly 1 year after Samsung, 2 after OnePlus. That is the shortest gap on this entire list. Apple called the feature ProMotion, as if it needed a brand name. It made scrolling visibly smoother and gaming significantly better. Android mid-range phones hit 120 Hz the same year for half the price. 1 year late is almost impressive by Apple's historical standards. They did not even call it copying. They called it industry-leading. 1 year is quick. The next feature they were 12 years late on. 12. Customizable home screen and widgets. 12 years. Android shipped with fully customizable home screen widgets in 2008. Resize them, move them anywhere. Stack multiple widgets together. Live weather, calendar events, music controls, all on the home screen. The iPhone home screen was a fixed grid of icons for 12 years. Same rows, same columns, same layout every single time. You could not move icons to the second row. You could not add a widget. iOS 14 in 2020 finally added widgets and allowed icon repositioning. Apple described it as a complete reimagining of the iPhone home screen. Android described it as their 2008 home screen. 12 years of a completely rigid grid. 12 years of Android users asking when iPhone would allow this. 12 years of Apple saying the current design was fine. Then 2020 happened, and Apple changed their mind. The next feature took 1 year longer than that. Default app switching. 13 years. Android allowed users to set any default app from the very beginning. Default browser, default Maps app, default email. Your choice entirely. Install Chrome. Set it as default. Done. Simple. On iPhone, everything opened in Apple's own apps. Always. Links opened in Safari. Addresses opened in Apple Maps. Email opened in Apple Mail. You had no say in this for 13 years. iOS 14 in 2020 finally allowed users to change their default browser and email app. 2 apps. Just browser and email. Not Maps, not Music, not Calendar, not Messaging, just 2. Full default app control for all app categories came even later than that. 13 years of being told Apple knows which apps you should use. 13 years of opening Apple Maps when you wanted Google Maps. The worst part is it took an external force to fix the next one. USB-C, 8 years, and it literally required a law. Android phones started switching to USB-C in 2015. By 2017, USB-C was standard on virtually every Android flagship. One cable for your phone, your laptop, your tablet, your everything. Apple kept the Lightning connector on every iPhone for 8 more years. Your iPhone needed its own cable. Nothing else worked. In 2022, the European Union passed the Common Charger Directive. All smartphones sold in Europe must use USB-C by the end of 2024. Apple switched to USB-C with the iPhone 15 in 2023, 8 years after Android, 1 year before the legal deadline. Apple said USB-C opened up exciting new possibilities for iPhone users. Android users had been experiencing those possibilities since 2015, 8 years and a government law. The EU also had to force the very next feature, sideloading in third-party app stores, forced by law. Android has always allowed app installation from outside the Play Store. One toggle in settings. Enable unknown sources. Install anything. Alternative app stores. Developer builds. Apps Apple would never approve. On iPhone, the App Store was the only way to install any app. Every app had to pass Apple's approval. Every app paid Apple 30%. No exceptions, no alternatives, no way around it. The EU's Digital Markets Act came into force in March 2024. Apple was legally required to allow third-party app stores in Europe. They complied. Europe only. The rest of the world still has no choice. Apple made the compliance process intentionally difficult for developers. 2 features forced by law in back-to-back years. Neither given voluntarily. Both adopted only when required. The last feature was different. Nobody forced this one. Apple just panicked. AI built into the OS. Panic-driven innovation. Google has been building on-device AI into Android for years, now playing identified songs playing nearby without internet access in 2017. Live caption transcribed any audio in real time in 2019. Gemini Nano ran a large language model directly on the device in 2023. Apple launched Apple Intelligence with the iPhone 16 in September 2024. On-device processing. Private. Fast. No server required. It rewrites emails, summarizes notifications, and cleans up photos automatically. Google had been doing most of this for years already. The difference is that Apple Intelligence was not triggered by Android. It was triggered by ChatGPT becoming the most talked about product on Earth. Apple saw the entire world discussing AI and launched a response in 2024. In 13 sections, that is the only one where the copy was not of Google. Progress of a kind. Every single feature on this list is now on your iPhone. Apple got there eventually. The phone they were racing against the whole time is on the screen. Every iPhone generation explained. Go watch it next.